Hello, I'm Trey and welcome to another of my colouring tutorials. This is part 5, working on a design from Nice Little Town 4 by Tanya, Bogema, Stolova. There's only a few pieces left to do on this design. I did do one or two pieces off camera, just small sections that I felt wouldn't be of that much interest for people to watch. So I've left the flowers and the foliage and the curtains to finish on this tutorial. Now I decided to include a couple of more colours with my colour palette, and that was pinks and greens, and so the rest of this design I'll be using those colours. Now I've decided to do the pink sections first, which I felt would be the toadstools, flowers, and I also think it would be nice to do the curtains and the clothing and stuff on the line in those pinks. So as usual, I'm going to do the lightest colour in a light pressure. Start on the curtains first. And I'll do this towel at the bottom. I'm going to do the middle of the towel in the greens, so that stands out a bit better. Now I'm going to use a medium pink and work in the shaded areas. There's no shading on this curtain, so I'm going to shade from the inside of the curtain and just extend out a little bit. And there's a line here I'm going to shade on the inside of that line. Towel will have the darkest at the back. There's quite a lot of shading on that part. It's in the shadow, bent over the pole. So I'll add the shading in for this. And just a little bit round the edging. And the darkest, it's more like a reddy pink, I'll use for the curtains next. and it's just going to be around the edge of the shading to make that stand out a bit more. I'm going to put these slight little patterns on the end of these curtains in the darker colour. And that's the base colours for those curtains and the towel. Now I'm going to do the base layers for the toadstools, and I'm looking at the toadstools and there's like sections of pattern, so I'm going to do those dots there in green so they'll stand out a little bit more, so I'll leave those dots and do the rest in the pinks. I'm going to cover all of those toadstools first in one layer of light pink. Now with my medium pink I'm going to do a little bit of shading. I'm going to shade in around this top section to highlight that. And underneath here there's a shaded section, so I'll darken that in with the pinks. I'll do that with all of the toadstools. Just highlight the top section by going around it in a darker colour. And my darkest reddish pink, I'll go into the shaded areas, just the edges of it. Now with the toadstools, I'm going to add a little bit of shading with my medium pink on one side of the toadstool. So I'm going to extend that shading just on one side. I've noticed a little bit of shading there, so I'll put a slight darker pink there, and I'm just going to put a little highlight there, like overlap. So that's the first 3 layers on the toadstools, and now I'm going to do these flowers on the tank. Now the middle of the flowers I'm going to do the darkest pink. And I'll go over all of the flower petals and the second middle section in the lightest pink. Now there's a little bit of shading I want to do now with the medium pink. There's quite a bit of shading on these flowers in this corner of the tank, so I'm going to use my medium pink to add that shading. And with the other flowers there isn't any shading on those, so I'm going to do a little bit of shading from the middle of the petals. And also I'm going to add a little bit around the edging of the second section, just a little bit, probably on one side, just to make it a little bit more interesting. Now I'm going to use my darkest reddish pink again, go around the edges of the shading that's already on these flowers to deepen that a little bit. And then I'll go into these other flowers just around the edge of that circle at the end of each petal to darken that in. Creates almost like a gradient effect. That's the first 3 layers on the flowers on the tank. I'm now going to work on these flowers and these flowers. Do these ones first. Again, a light layer of pink all over the flower, like a base layer. I'm going to use a little bit of the lines that's already on these flowers for the shading. So there's this loop that comes round, so I'm going to go on the inside of that and darken it in. And on the petals I'm just going to darken in where those lines are near the middle and the end obviously of each petal. It's very similar to what I've done on this one. And with my darkest red, reddy pink, I'm just going to darken in those sections, not covering all of the medium pink, of these flowers now. I'm going to do the darkest pink in the middle. Now I'll go over all of the flowers in the lightest pink I'm using. Now I'm going to use a medium pink, but I'm not going to do the same as I've done these other flowers from the middle. I'm going to do the highlight around the edge of the petal. It's slightly different. I'm going to do the two of the smaller flowers, and that's that one and that one, which look very similar. So I'm going to put my lightest pink all over the flower, first layer. Now the medium pink, I'm going to go where the shading is already there. Try to make the flowers slightly different, you know, for each shape. Make it a little bit more interesting, because I'm using the same colours, and it's kind of nice to try and make flowers look different despite them being used in the same colours. So I'm going to put medium pink all the way into that section, because I want that band to be a different colour. So I'm going to do the band in the darkest pink. And just put a little bit of the darkest reddish pink in the middle where the stalk is. Okay, so that's that flower. Now there's two more things I want to do in this pink. That's these almost like bubble flowers, and this bigger flower. Now these bubble flowers I'm going to cover in a light layer of pink, all of the bubbles. And then I'm just going to darken in one edge of each of them. Go so far with the medium pink. And give them a little bit of depth. And then with my darkest reddish pink, I'm going to go around the edge where I've shaded in, just darkening that edge a little bit. That's the first layers for that section, and there's this flower at the back of here. Now it's kind of a reasonably big flower, and I'm thinking about putting two colours on that flower. So in the middle I'll use the lightest pink, and in between the petals, the middle of each petal, I'll do the lightest pink. And then round the edging I'll do a medium pink. And in the middle sections of these petals I'm just going to use the darkest pink, pinky red, just on the petal sections. And there's these little dots, and I'm going to use a very pale green for those, just to make them stand out a little bit more. Thought that might look a bit more interesting. So that's the first layers for the flower. And I feel that that's all of the flowers done. And now I'm going to do some green areas, just to finish off the foliage as such. I'll come back to these sections. So I'll work on the top half first. I'm using the greens. They're kind of got a bluish tint to them. I thought they would work quite nicely with the blue in the building. So I'm going to put down a light layer of green. Over this section. I'll do this as well. Now there's some shading on these sections. I decided to do all these together because they look similar, you know, they've been drawn the similar way. Now these here I'm going to do in darker green. So I'm going to just go into the shaded areas with my medium green. And I'm using the shading that's already there. Now this one has no shading, so I'm just going to darken in the edge. And with my darkest green, I will outline the edge of the shading, the inner edge, to darken that slightly. And I'm going to do all of those round sections in the darker green so they stand out a little bit. And I'll do the same for all the similar shaped bushes. Now there's some other leaves on here that I'll now do. There's these here, and also on the plant pot, and this foliage is almost like a, like a succulent effect. But I'll do them as I would do normal leaves. So I'll start on this one. I'm going to put my lightest green down. Same with this one here. Now this one has some shading on, so I'll put the medium green in the shading. It's darkening the shaded area that's already there. Now this one doesn't have any shading, so I'm just going to darken in the bottom edge and extend it up a little bit. With my darkest green, I'll darken in the edges of the shading on these leaves because there is some shading there. And I'll darken in the shading I put in these leaves just on the edges. Now there's this plant here, the foliage. I'm going to do the same again. Go over all the leaves in light green first as a base. Now there is some shading on this section, so I'm going to darken in that shading with the medium green. There's not a lot of shading, but there's a little bit there. And if there isn't any shading, I'm just going to darken in the creased areas and maybe the overlapping sections. And I'll darken in the edges of the shading with my darkest green. That's the first layers for that foliage. Now there's this leaf here, and it had some shading on it, so I'm going to follow the shading. I'm going to cover up all the leaf, the base layer, with light green. And then just follow the shading with the medium green. And just the edges again of the shaded area with the dark green. Now the other green sections I want to do are these circular patterns. and also I wanted to make this part of the towel green, so I'm going to do the towel first, go over the pattern in a pale green, and I'll add a little bit of shading in there. Now the shading for this pattern, because there is no shading on the pattern, I'm just going to put it inside, almost like where the crease lines are. Just make it a little bit more interesting. And darkening the edges of those with my darker green. This pot here with the bread that's inside, I'm going to do that in green because there's quite a lot of pink in that area. It'll be more when I do this. So I wanted a little bit of a different colour there. So cover all of it in the pale green, and then I'll put a little bit of shading in. There is no shading on this little tub pot, so I'm just going to estimate where I think there'll be some shading. That's a lighter lip, so I'm going to put some shading underneath that, and then just darken it in a little bit. Put a little bit of shade in there because I thought the window would cause a bit of a shadow. Now remember, these are just the light layers, the first light layers. This is not finished. This is giving me an idea where the colours are going to be for me to do my extra layering. Now these here, it's almost like they're holding the washing line on. I'm going to cover all of those in pale green first. And then I'm going to use the darkest green. I'm going to bother with the medium green and go inside these sections. There is a stalk here which is mostly in shadow, so I'm going to use my medium green to colour that in. For small areas I don't tend to do too much shading, just too fiddly. I mean, it looks better to do something, not completely flat, but it can be kind of awkward. So I'm just going to put a little bit of darker along an edge in there, just to give it a contrast. Now we've got these circles, and there is a little bit of shading in some of them, so I'm going to put a base layer down of the pale green over all of it, all of each of those circles. Now with the shaded sections, I'm going to use my medium green just to start highlighting those. Now with these ones, it's in the middle of the circles. The other circles didn't have any shading on, so I'm going to do them the same as I did these little bubbles. I'm going to just shade from the edge part way across, give a little bit of depth. Darkest green. For these double circles, I'm just going to go around the edge of the shaded area that's there. Just darken that slightly. And with the single circles, I will just go along the edge with the darker green, just to highlight and deepening that edge. Just gives it a little bit of 3D effect on those circles. There's some little things at the bottom of here. I've just put a little bit of light green in the middle, and I'm going to go around the edge and with pink. Not a great deal of options to shade there, so it's just to add a bit of colour. Now the towels, this section here I want to do in green, so I'll do that first. I'll do the first layer in a pale green for that band, and then I'm just going to use the medium green to darken in where the folds are. There's little folds here, so I'm going to darken those in to highlight those folds, a bit like how I did a dress on a different tutorial. And I'll darken those edges again for the folds. And it gives it more of a wave effect. So now I'm going to do the rest of the towels in pink, including this one. So I'm going to put the pale pink layer down first and then add some shading. There is no shading with these towels, so I'll see if I can work out from the line out where I can put shading. I'm going to use the line art to try and put some shading in for these towels. Now the back of the towel will be darker because it's folded over, so I'm going to darken that in. Using the medium pink for now. There's a line there, so I'm going to just kind of shade that section, extend it a little bit. And there's also two lines here, so I'm going to shade that in to give the impression it's delved in, and this is standing out and that's standing out. So I'm going to put another shaded section there. So hopefully it gives the effect of folds in the material. Do the same with this towel. The back is darker because it's folded over. There's other sections here that is the back underneath side of the towel. I'll do those darker and go around the line to darkening where I feel it would emphasise the folds of the material. So I put in where I feel there might be some darker areas to emphasise the folds of the material, and I also put a little bit of shading round the peg on the clothing, you know, on the towels, because I think that would also cause a shadow. I'm going to go and do the edges of those lines now in the darkest reddish pink I'm using. And also, if it's underneath, when it's folded up, I'll darken those in. So that is the first layer of all of those sections that I've done in this part of the tutorial. They all need more layers. So this is just a rough start. It's something I like to do, so it gives me an idea of where my shading is and my light sections are. So I will do more layers for each of those elements in the same way I've just done the first 3 layers, and then I'll come back to this. Now I put down one more layer of the palest colour that I did for those sections. That was a pale green and a pale pink, and I put 2 layers down of the darker colours. And one of the reasons I did that is because when I'm doing small areas, I tend to lose my shading because there's not really enough space to show the difference. So what I've hoping to do is when I do the blend, the darker colours will move a little bit into the lighter colours to give a gradient effect. So that's what I'm hoping for. So I'm going to do some shading now with my blend with a blender pencil and see how that works. I'll work on the pink areas first. I'm just doing a light pressure with the blending. I'm pushing the darker sections into the lighter sections to see if it pushes some more colour there, and I can still keep a little bit of the gradient shading. that's worked quite well. It's softened up the areas of shading, and it has made the lighter areas a bit darker, but I've still retained my shading, so that's quite good. I like that. So I've just got the green to blend now and see if that works the same. I'm going to blend the green areas in the same way I've done the pink, pushing the dark into the light. One of the things I am noticing is that I'm having to put more of a medium pressure on to do this, so that I can push the colour a bit better. Normally I do a light blend, but I need to put a little bit more pressure on to do it this way. The sections where there isn't so much shading, I've already did the blending on those, so it isn't that I've ignored them, I did it earlier. Now that's worked quite well, and considering this is quite textured card, I'm pleased with that. I pushed the darker colours into the lighter areas, and it's maintained some of my shading, which I normally lose when I'm doing small areas. There just isn't enough area really to be able to keep all the colour, so they just tend to push into each other, so it's not too bad. I still manage to keep some of that. So this actually is finished now. I think that the larger areas have worked really well with the various pencils and the blending with this textured card. These pencils have been used in the Castle Art and the Marco Refine, have worked really well with this textured card. I needed more layers down, but that's okay. You know, I was quite happy to put more layers down. Not much more, maybe 2 or 3. The small areas, which I've just done, a little bit more awkward, but still worked okay. So I don't feel like I've lost too much of the shading from all the bigger areas. So this is the end of this tutorial and the end of this project. I do hope people who have watched all of the parts have got some tips, some ideas, and if you have any thoughts or questions, or any ideas yourself, or if anything out of these tutorials have helped you, please do leave a comment. I'd like to read them, and I will respond to them as soon as I can. So bye for now, and I'll come back with a new tutorial soon.